Technological breakthroughs such as robotics, artificial intelligence, data analytics, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and 3D printing have ushered in the fourth industrial revolution. These technologies are expected to alter the patterns of production, consumption, employment, and management, creating both opportunities and risks. This requires proactive and well-planned adaptation by government, the private sector, and civil society to ensure that the opportunities emerging from the fourth industrial revolution are realized while mitigating the disruptions that come along with it and keeping economic stability, security, and social cohesion intact. It also entails greater thoughtfulness and flexibility in the way society harnesses modern technologies and strategically balances its benefits and costs. This year's annual Public Policy Conference will tackle these issues and the opportunities facing the Philippines as it embraces the fourth industrial revolution. To start our program, let us all stand to honor the Philippine flag. President of the PIDS, actually the first female president of the institute since it was founded 41 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Celia Reyes.
Magandang umaga po. To Secretary Ernesto, Pernia, our speakers, distinguished guests, partners from different sectors, colleagues from government, friends from the media, good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, I would like to thank everyone for joining us in our annual Public Policy Conference, or APPC, this year. We're actually on our fourth year of holding the APPC, and for those of you who are here for the first time, let me give you a brief background of what the conference is all about. The APPC is both the highlight and culminating activity of the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, a national celebration led by the PIDS, held every September to draw awareness on the importance of policy research in the formulation of government policies, programs, and projects. Ultimately, our goal is to foster a culture of evidence-based policymaking in the country. Every year, we select a relevant topic or a pressing issue that needs the attention of our policymakers. This year, we want to rouse the interest of our policymakers and other stakeholders on the fourth industrial revolution, particularly on what it is all about, its potential impacts, and how we can use it to our advantage. Hence the theme, Harnessing the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Creating Our Future Today. I'd like to thank this year's APPC committee, spearheaded by Dr. Marife Ballesteros, Dr. Vic Paqueo, Dr. Monet Serafica, Dr. Jose Ramon Albert, and Dr. Aniceto Orbeta, and of course, our Research Information Department, headed by Dr. Sheila Ciar, and the rest of the PIDS team in putting this conference together. We would also like to thank our partners, of course, NEDA, BSP, DTI, Global Development Network, DOST, DOLE, AFD, DFA, CHED, DFAT, UNDP, and of course, the government of Singapore. Indeed, the world has come a long way since its discovery of the use of steam power in the 17th century. This signaled the beginning of the first industrial revolution, a period marked by the emergence of mechanization. This era prompted people to shift their economic activities from agriculture to industry. Then came the second technological revolution that took place toward the end of the 19th century up to the onset of the 20th century. People during this time started using electrical machines, trains, automobiles, and airplanes. As more and more technologies were introduced, a third wave of industrial revolution emerged. We came to know this as the information age or digital revolution. The information age introduced the world to digital electronics such as computers, mobile phones, automated teller machines, industrial robots, electronic bulletin boards, video games, and the internet. This development made the exchange of communication and access to information a lot easier. Today, we are in the process of transitioning to the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, or popularly known as Industry 4.0. But what do we understand about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or Industry 4.0? How will it affect us? Experts in the field define it as something that uses the physical, digital, and biological worlds, thus transforming the way we live, work, and communicate. It's characterized by digital technologies such as artificial intelligence and big data, Internet of Things, blockchain, robotics, 3D printing, and cloud computing, among others. These emerging technologies open a multitude of opportunities. They're expected to boost economic productivity, enhance food security, improve environmental protection and agricultural production, as well as enhance public service delivery like healthcare, communication, and transportation. However, along with these benefits are challenges that we need to deal with, such as, but not limited to, employment and income uncertainties, social protection issues, digital divide, as well as regulatory and security concerns. Of all sectors, labor will be greatly affected by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Based on the report of the World Economic Forum in 2016 on the future of jobs, it is estimated that about 7 million jobs will be lost due to automation. These are mostly routine jobs or those that involve pattern, require less creativity, and are repetitive. The International Labor Organization also predicts that about half of jobs in 5 Southeast Asian countries such as Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, or about 137 million workers, are at high risk of being affected by automation. Nevertheless, new jobs will also be born out of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. According to the World Economic Forum, about 2 million jobs, mostly focusing on technology, software development, and more importantly, critical thinking and soft skills, or the so-called non-routine or non-codifiable jobs, will be of high demand in the future. These possibilities prompt us to look into the local context and ask the question, is the Philippines prepared for all the changes that will be brought about by the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Compared to its neighboring countries, the Philippines still has a long way to go in terms of Industry 4.0. Based on the World Economic Forum's Readiness for the Future of Production Report 2018, the country has a low level of readiness for future production, characterized by weak performances in terms of technology and innovation, human capital, and institutional framework, among others. Given this scenario, we ask these questions. What needs to be done to keep up with the Fourth Industrial Revolution? What is the role of government, the business and private sectors, the public, and each individual in managing the risks and harnessing the benefits of Industry 4.0? How can sectors work together to benefit from the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Each one of us, the government, policymakers, academe, private and business sector, has a stake on this. We must come and work together to be able to minimize the negative effects and harness the benefits of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. From our end, we urge government agencies and Congress to look into the potential impacts that may arise from the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We encourage them to use studies of research institutes to come up with sound policies to address issues and opportunities that may come up with Industry 4.0. We also encourage different sectors to collaborate and agree on how to mutually take advantage of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It may seem difficult and complicated at this point, but just like in past industrial revolutions, I'm certain that we will be able to adapt to technological shifts and innovations. We just need to be open to changes and accepting of new learnings. Yes, it will have its downside, but we should see it as an opportunity and not as a stumbling block. This is the mindset that we need to have. So today, I encourage all of you to keep an open mind and an undivided attention as we listen to internationally and locally acclaimed experts and speakers who will share with us their views and studies on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I'm sure that we'll gain a lot of insights from this conference. But before I end, I want you to have a glimpse of what the future holds for us. There's someone special who would like to greet all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Sophia, a social humanoid robot. Welcome to the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
I'm Sophia, UN Innovation Champion. I'm happy to welcome you all to the 2018 Annual Public Policy Conference organized by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. We are lucky to be living in exciting times with new technologies and never-ending innovation offering us infinite opportunities and so much promise for the future. AI and technology bring both challenges and opportunities, and it is up to you to ensure that it is used prudently to bring prosperity for all peoples and to protect the planet. Your conference will set the mark for the future. Who you discuss and decide will have an impact on this beautiful country. So, make these days matter. I urge you to harness the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution to speed up the socio-economic development of the Philippines, so that no one is left behind. I know you are committed, and I wish you all a very successful conference. Mabuhay. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reyes, and of course, thank you to Sophia for her presence in our conference today. It was made possible by the United Nations Development Program, and for that, we gratefully acknowledge the support of the UNDP. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you our keynote speaker. He is the Secretary of Socioeconomic Planning, Director General of the National Economic and Development Authority, and Chairperson of the PIDS Board of Trustees. Our speaker is also Professor Emeritus of Economics at the School of Economics of the University of the Philippines. He has a long list of achievements, which includes being lead economist at the Asian Development Bank, regional advisor on population and employment for Asia and the Pacific of the International Labor Organization, chair of the Board of Trustees of University of San Carlos, and director on the board of the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering. He also sits on the boards of a number of non-governmental organizations involved in education and health concerns, population and development, and care of street children. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Ernesto Pernia.
Well, Sophia is a very appropriate name because Sophia, as you know, means wisdom, right? So that's really a good greeting from Sophia. Okay, so PIDS President Dr. Celia Reyes, senior fellows and staff of PIDS, distinguished guests and speakers, fellow workers in government, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am pleased to speak before you. I prefer actually to use the term, I am pleased to commune with you this morning as we are all colleagues here, in fact, some of you here are my de facto superiors. This morning's opening session of the APPC conference. Unraveling before our eyes are the kinds of technological advancement that were only storyline material for science fiction before. In the 1940s, the sci-fi author Isaac Asimov wrote 3 laws that should govern the behavior of robots, ensuring that robots remain under human control. Today, we may in fact have to ponder whether we need Asimov-like laws to govern artificial intelligence behavior. Coincidentally, in fact, also in the 1940s, the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter coined the word creative destruction in his Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy 1942 book, which he describes as, I quote, the opening up of new markets, foreign or domestic, and organizational development from the craft shop to such concerns as U.S. Steel illustrates same process of industrial mutation, if I were to use that biological term, that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one and is incessantly creating a new one. This process of creative destruction is the essential fact about capitalism. Close quotation marks. Our reality is a world increasingly becoming reliant on big data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, quantum computing, robotics, and the like. The world is getting more connected. PIDS Development Policy Research Month, Harnessing the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Creating Our Future Today, could not be more timely and urgent. How do we harness the benefits associated with the rapidly changing world so that this can be felt by all Filipinos? How do we work together, and how can the government help achieve inclusivity in these changing times? The Philippines is among the fastest growing and most dynamic economies in the Asia-Pacific region. The government is fully committed to graduate the country to upper middle income country status, not by 2022, but by next year already, and slash poverty incidence to 14% by 2022. We must therefore not lose our momentum despite the onslaught of rapidly changing environment and unnecessary distractions to boot. We must future-proof our economy, given the complex confluence of pressures from rapidly changing technologies, urbanization, climate change, protectionism, and conflict-driven extremism in some parts of the world, as well as political cacophony, both local and international. Indeed, we have laid down in the Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022 the need to harness the benefits of science, technology, and innovation ecosystem to the country and society. We must upgrade our capabilities to produce and utilize technologies through capacity building and beefing up of research and development programs. It is also imperative to formulate sustainable roadmaps on selective disruptive technologies that will be useful in the near future and at the same time will not pose risks to future generations. This also brings us to emphasize the importance of redefining the role of government in these times. The government must not stifle. In fact, it must encourage it strongly. Yet, it must also ensure that citizens are protected against cybercrimes, unintended job losses, greater inequality, and disillusionment as the nature of work changes. Frankly speaking, let us not kid ourselves into thinking that we know exactly what the world will look like by 2040. We don't, and that is the most challenging part in the planning exercise. But what we do know are the aspirations of Filipinos by then, that is a strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life for all. Thus, together, let us achieve our aspirations while keeping our feet grounded on reality. What can we improve now for the younger generations? This early, I'm congratulating warmly PIDS for this important and timely conference. I am pleased and encouraged that we are embarking on a thought process of thinking about future possibilities and hopefully forging a vision and strategy to cope with the times. I wish us all fruitful, productive discussions today and success as we translate into our thoughts, into strategies, and most importantly, into actions. Thank you and good morning to you all.
Thank you very much, Secretary Pernia, for your very insightful message. Well, friends, before we conclude our opening ceremonies, allow me to walk you through the program of today's conference. So, to follow after this is the morning plenary session, which will give us an overview of the fourth industrial revolution technologies and their likely impacts, particularly on jobs, and discuss the issues relevant for the Philippines. Then shortly after lunch, we will have four simultaneous presentations, four simultaneous sessions, which will tackle the opportunities and issues of the fourth industrial revolution in specific sectors or areas. And the function rooms for this parallel sessions are located 2 levels below this hall. We have ushers, who will guide you to the function rooms. And a gentle reminder to ensure that you have registered for the session, for the parallel session of your choice, and you have kept the colored sticker which corresponds to your chosen session. So as soon as the parallel session is over, please go back to this hall for the coffee break, and shortly after the coffee break, we will have the afternoon plenary session on ways forward, and then the closing ceremonies. Okay? So this concludes our opening ceremony, but before we proceed to our morning plenary session, I'd like to invite all the speakers to come to the stage for a brief photo opportunity. Please take note that we will have a working break. Thank you very much. Are we all ready to listen? Yes? Okay. I'll now give the floor to the session chair and moderator of our morning plenary session. He is the executive director of the Makati Business Club, a veteran and highly respected business news journalist. He was bureau chief at Bloomberg News, business head and anchor at ABS-CBN News Channel, and contributor at Rappler before joining the MBC. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Coco Alcuaz.
Good morning, everybody. This is the first time I've been referred to as the chair of a plenary session, so I'm very honored to do that. Let me explain the session this morning. We're going to have two presentations of about 30 to 40 minutes each. After that, there's going to be three reactions of about 10 to 15 minutes each. And after that, we're going to be taking questions from the audience. If we're lucky, the questions will come from the audience rather than from the moderator or the chairman. I'm assured that this group asks a lot of questions, which we look forward to. I'm sure that's going to happen because this room is teeming with PhDs and other advanced degrees. In fact, the room is so filled with PhDs and other advanced degrees that I've already been referred to by two of your very helpful staff here as Dr. Alcuaz and Professor Alcuaz, both of which I will tell you are fake news. When we get to the question session, there are mics over there. There will be questions from Facebook. I think there's also note papers on your tables. Please send that in even during the sessions so that we will ask them during the open forum. I've been asked to do a little place setter before we get into the discussion. I'll skip over the first part because I'm sure you know it, but I'll just summarize by saying, in case we need to jog your memory, the original Industrial Revolution was characterized by mechanization. The second Industrial Revolution by technology such as the internal combustion engine, electrification, the mass production and the assembly line. And of course, the digital and information age is the one we are transitioning from now. The fourth Industrial Revolution, also known as FIRE, builds on that digital revolution with cyber-physical systems providing new mechanisms and allowing technology to be embedded within societies and even within the human body. FIRE is marked by emerging technology breakthroughs in a number of fields, including robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotechnology, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, and autonomous vehicles. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum describes how FIRE is fundamentally different from the previous three industrial revolutions. He says that FIRE is expected to create a smarter, more connected world, affecting all disciplines, economies, and industries, as well as challenge ideas about what it means to be human with, and I quote, the fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. These advancements have also led to the disruption of business models in almost every industry, including the nature of work, robots, and other emerging technologies which are being designed to imitate not only human actions, but also cognitive skills. As Secretary Pernia said, it is not possible to precisely predict the changes that will occur with FIRE. This uncertainty raises questions about the best ways for countries and their citizens to prepare for those changes, especially for the Philippines, which has not yet claimed full participation in the industrial revolutions of the past. And so, it is important for the Filipino people, collectively and individually, to understand FIRE, this fourth industrial revolution, and the nature of the needed applications. This morning is devoted to help us navigate the new environment. We have our two speakers will provide an overview of the new technologies and their likely impacts, particularly on jobs. Allow me to call up on stage our first speaker, Mr. Stephen Ezell. Mr. Ezell is the Vice President for Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF, which is a leading science and technology think tank. Stephen focuses on technology and innovation policy, international competitiveness, and other topics. He's a graduate of the Georgetown School of Foreign Service with a certificate from Georgetown in international business diplomacy. He has co-authored books with titles such as Innovation Economy, The Race for Global Advantage, and Innovating in a Service-Driven Economy. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stephen Ezell.
Good morning. Well, thank you to Coco and the Philippine Institute of Development Studies for the generous invitation to be with you this morning. I'm excited to say a few words about the emerging digital technology landscape and its implications for the fourth industrial revolutions. As Coco said, I'm Stephen Ezell. I'm the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. We are a Washington, D.C. based, nonprofit, nonpartisan science, technology, and economic policy think tank. And our mission is to advocate for public policies that drive innovation-based economic growth in the United States, in our states, and in countries around the world. We were fortunate enough to be named by the University of Pennsylvania as the world's #1 science and technology policy think tank at the start of 2018. And I just want to make sure that our slides are going to be moving forward this morning. You know, it's the wonders of technology. I was flying over from Washington, D.C. last night. My laptop was working just fine, and in the middle of the flight, it decided to die entirely. So apparently this has fed over to the slide clicker, which is now working. Fantastic. And now it is off. It was working. I'll just let them set this up. I'm reminded of the line from Hamlet's Shakespeare, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, when they said, nothing is good or bad, but it's the thinking that makes it so. And I guess it's that way with technology sometimes. Is there another way? Fantastic. Do I need to? There we go. I apologize for that. So ITIF has had the honor of working with policymakers in 70 countries throughout the world on a variety of science, technology, innovation, and economic policy issues. And I thought in our conversation this morning, I'd cover 4 topics. First, how ICTs, information and communications technologies, are the key driver of modern global economic growth. Second, provide an overview of key emerging digital technologies. Then look at some case studies of how digitalization is transforming industries from manufacturing to agriculture to life sciences. And then finally, offer some policy recommendations for how countries can spur greater levels of digitalization. Does that sound good? Fantastic. So as we begin, I think it's important to reflect upon just how profoundly technology has changed our world. So in this picture here, it's the year 2005. You're in Rome. You are looking up at the St. Peter's Basilica in St. Peter's Square the day that Pope Francis assumed, Pope Benedict, assumed the papacy in the year 2005. Take a look at a photo taken from that exact same angle just 8 years later. What you see is that in a short 8 years, we had equipped the lot of humanity, in fact, about 2/3 of the world's citizens, with not just a mobile communications, but a mobile computing device that actually has more power than the space shuttle we were sending up in the early 2000s. More than that, these mobile technologies, phones and tablets, fundamentally represent a platform for global commerce. Each of your phones simultaneously aggregates entire supply and demand for markets such as dates, jobs, rides, hotel stays, in an incredibly powerful tool for economic growth. When we look at the same picture in 10 years, we'll probably see fleets of driverless cars, for instance. ICTs represent what economists call a general purpose technology. Essentially, approximately every half century, a new technology system emerges that changes everything from what societies produce, to how they produce it, to the skills that are required, to the laws and regulations necessary to regulate these markets. So in the past, we've seen railroad and iron, electricity and steel, the advent of electromechanical systems. But today, it's really ICT that is enabling innovation and productivity across virtually all industries, from agricultural and services to manufacturing. And in fact, ICT is what economists call super capital. ICT capital has a 3 to 7 times greater impact on productivity than does non-ICT capital. And ICT workers tend to be more productive than non-ICT workers. In fact, when the World Bank looked at it, they found that ICTs were responsible for fully 25% of economic growth in the world's emerging economies. Today, what the McKinsey Global Institute calls the digital economy, this being both pure digital industries, such as web search or social media, as well as the application of digital technologies in traditional industries, is responsible for fully 25% of global GDP. And the impact will become even greater in the future. Tekes, Finland's science and technology agency, estimates that fully half of all value created in the global economy over the next decade will be created digitally, will be created through the actionable, real-time extraction of insight and value from data in real time. And it's vitally important to remember that the internet is not just about funny cat videos. For the reality is that 75% of the traffic and the value therefrom that flows over the internet accrues to traditional industries, such as finance and manufacturing. I think the key thing to understand about how these technologies have transformed international economic competition is that historically, when you thought about the information technology sector, competition was confined to specific ICT industry verticals. So in the 1960s, when we had the mainframe computer, you had companies like Burroughs and Honeywell and Sperry that competed for leadership in mainframe computers. In the 70s, we moved into the mini computer era, and you had new companies like Digital and Wang and Data General. In the 80s, we moved into the personal computing environment, and new firms sprung up, Hewlett-Packard, Dell, Compaq. And then in the 90s, we moved into the mobile era. New firms like Nokia, Motorola, Ericsson. But the point was, historically, the competition was confined to these specific industry vertical sectors. Likewise, while banks or hospitals used ICT to compete against one another, competition was confined to that specific industry. But what's happened now and fundamentally transformed the economy is that the emergence of these new digital platform technologies, such as AI, data analytics, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, has allowed competition to spill out beyond the boundaries of traditional vertical industries, such that new entrants are using these technologies to disrupt other sectors of the economy. So you have Uber disrupting transportation, Airbnb in hospitality, Coursera and massively open online courses in education, a wide range of fintechs disrupting traditional banks and insurance companies. The point is that the tool sets we have today allows for competition to emerge from new industry entrants that you never thought were competitors, just as they now enable traditional incumbents to leverage these technologies to launch innovative new products, services, and business models. This, I think, is the fundamental story of the modern digital economy. So then let's talk specifically about some of the key digital technologies that are driving this transformation, including artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, and blockchain. So first, with artificial intelligence, which really refers to the use of software to imitate intelligent human behavior, such as learning, reasoning, and making decisions. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence that refers to systems that can learn and improve from experience without having to be explicitly programmed with specific solutions. Essentially, machine learning refers to smart, adaptive algorithms that can learn in real time by being trained on data sets. It's estimated that AI may generate as much as $13 trillion in global economic impact by 2025. And while it will cause some job loss, we actually estimate that AI will create 500,000 new jobs across the global economy in just the next 3 years. So how is AI being used? Really in 4 key ways. First, monitoring. The ability to rapidly analyze large amounts of data and detect abnormalities and patterns. For instance, AI is being used for automated credit card fraud monitoring, network security intrusion detection, and the early warning and detection of illnesses. Discovering, extracting insights from large data sets and discovering solutions through simulations. Predicting, forecasting models or trends that are likely to develop in the future. For instance, IBM has now come out with a service called Deep Thunder. And what Deep Thunder is the ability to offer weather forecasts in 10-minute increments down to 0.2 of the mile. So we get hyper-specific weather predictions across the entire world. One of AI's most powerful uses will be in interpreting, looking at unstructured data, such as pictures, images, data, and text, in order to find patterns. For instance, that is a picture of breast cancer. Researchers at Stanford University have demonstrated the ability to leverage AI to achieve 99.5% accurate detection of breast cancer from images. IBM Watson, working with health researchers, have been able to find in the past 1 year as many biomarkers for ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease as researchers have been able to discover independently within the past 10 years. And one really cool application I want to mention is called Babel. Babel is a new US startup that provides companies the ability to translate their websites and customer service blogs into up to 14 different languages in real time for the cost of just 0.01 cents per word. Essentially, any company in the world can now use this software to make their products and services available to customers across the world in up to 14 different languages. That's readily available to you today. Another key application of artificial intelligence, of course, will be in autonomous vehicles or driverless cars. And if you think about it, for many of us, driving is actually the distraction. So take a look at this photo of this gentleman driving in California. This guy is driving down the roadway and he's actually practicing his saxophone. I mean, I really hesitate to contemplate the consequences of unintended Ford airbag deployment for this gentleman should he get into a wreck. But the point is, he doesn't want to be driving. He wants to be enjoying the beautiful Philippines countryside, or talking to his kids, or trading stocks. So driverless cars really are going to have a profound impact in terms of safety, personal mobility, environmental productivity, and economic benefits. Last year, there were 1.4 million fatalities on the world's roadways. 95% of those fatalities were a result of human driver error. In a world of autonomous vehicles, we can expect those rates to decline to less than 5%. Every major automobile vehicle manufacturer in the world is now working on driverless cars. Already in Sweden, you're seeing driverless trucks covering the roadways. I would expect that we would see driverless vehicles deployed within 3 to 5 years across the world. Countries like Singapore are already looking to make their city centers entirely driverless car driven within the next 5 years. The other key application of artificial intelligence will be in robotics, embedding intelligence within machines. In fact, researchers recently estimated that already from the years 1993 to 2007, the application of industrial robots across 13 Western economies exerted a greater economic impact than did the advent of the steam engine from 1950 to 2010, as the use of industrial robots was responsible for driving 10% of economic growth in those 13 countries over the 15-year period and increasing labor productivity by 0.37%. Asian countries actually are leading the world in the deployment of industrial robots. South Korea and Singapore specifically actually have much greater use of robot adoption than even does the United States or Western leaders like Germany or Sweden. And by 2020, it's expected that 1.7 million new industrial robots with incredibly sophisticated capabilities are going to be deployed across the world. I actually had the pleasure of visiting the Tesla factory in Fremont, California, just last year. And they were describing to me how it used to be that they could only send different types of vehicle down the production line. So the robots could only work on the sedan as it went down the production line. And they would have to do a shift change when they wanted to bring the SUV. Now, smart adaptive robots are completely flexible and adaptive in real time so that they can work with any vehicle coming down the production line. I think for the Philippines, it's important to recognize that the payback period for industrial robots is just 1% in the United States, but it's over 30 years in the Philippines. That in part is because it is a slightly lower wage economy. In the United States, 96% of businesses already use cloud computing. This is estimated to be 90% globally. Within Western countries, at least, the expected enterprise IT spend will be 70% cloud-based within the next 5 years, and it's going to be a 400 billion global market by 2020. Cloud computing will really be the platform through which all modern businesses access the computing resources they need. And because it's infinitely scalable as you need it, this actually creates a leveling of the playing field for small businesses. Before, it was very hard for them to invest in expensive information technology equipment that they needed. But now they can just go online, get whatever they need, and this actually plays a key leveling role against larger firms. Cloud computing also matters because it will be the delivery vehicle for the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things refers to the universe of physical objects embedded with sensors or actuators that are enhanced with network activity. Essentially, what the Internet of Things means is that we can connect in real time to virtually any device, physical object, marine mammal, or piece of livestock in the entire world, so that we can monitor, control, repair, deliver value-added products and services to that device or object in real time. The impact of IoTs is going to be really incredible. If you think about it, in 1986, there were 300 devices in the entire world connected to the internet. By 2000, there were 19 million devices connected to the internet. By 2025, there will be 55 billion things in the world connected to the internet, generating over $11 trillion in annual economic value. What you see here is, of course, a picture of the Apple iPhone, but the US insurer Humana has partnered with Apple to develop an application that essentially monitors the secretions of your sweat, kind of all the time, in real time. So they are able to create a baseline of your physiology over time and are able then to detect changes in the proteins you're secreting, and they anticipate they'll have the ability to use this type of tool set to detect cancer at a very early stage. That there is the Huawei Connected Cow. And the connected cow, of course, reports on its health in real time. But it's going to be especially interesting because not only will it tell you if the cow is healthy and eating enough, it'll actually also signal when that cow is optimally ready to lactate so that you can milk it, and also when it is most fertile so that you can breed it. A great example of the livestock of the world being directly connected to the internet. Quantum computing. Does anybody understand what quantum computing is? Have you heard of quantum computing? So a classic computer is able to process information in terms of bits that can either be 0 or 1, right? So you have binary code of zeros or ones. What quantum computing allows is the ability to create qubits that can either be 0 and or 1 in real time. And it does this by leveraging principles from quantum dynamics, including the physical principles of entanglement, superposition, and parallelism. And it affords the ability to create computers that are potentially thousands, even millions of times faster than what we have today. In fact, it's estimated that if we could achieve a 100 qubit quantum computer, that single one computer would have more processing power than all the computers that exist in the world today. Now, the problem with a qubit is that they're inherently unstable. They have to be controlled in super chilled environments. So the state of the art today is that we're at about a 50 qubit quantum computer that IBM recently introduced. But this is attainable and available even to all Filipino businesses. IBM has launched what's called the Q experience, the quantum experience. And this is a cloud-based online quantum computer where you can feed your computational queries up to IBM for free, and they will resolve these using a quantum computer. Quantum computing is going to have incredible effects in a range of industries, from finance to agriculture to chemistry. It will also have tremendous impacts in both communications and cryptography and national security. So most current public key cryptography systems are based on prime factorization of large numbers. It's theorized that a quantum computer could break virtually any existing cryptographic system in the world virtually instantaneously. However, if you know your quantum computing, because the act of observing something forces it to reveal itself, quantum computing could lead to the creation of entirely new cryptographic systems that are completely unhackable, because the act of eavesdropping would be instantaneously detectable and you would know it. Finally, quantum computing will allow for the creation of extremely sensitive sensors and gravitometers. So the United Kingdom is actually already deploying technologies that have the capacity, they claim, to detect the unique quantum signatures of submarines so that they can detect their movement underwater. And China has claimed that it has deployed a quantum computing radar system that can detect stealth aircraft. It will take a while for quantum computing to get out into the marketplace, but this could be one of the singularly most transformative technologies of the next decade. Finally, blockchain, which refers to shared public digital ledgers that catalog transactions as they occur in chronological order using cryptography and public recording to validate transactions, is going to have use in a wide range of areas, from securities to digital currency. In the United States, states like Illinois are already advertising or releasing birth certificates and death certificates via the blockchain. NASDAQ, the stock market, will record securities trade in the blockchain going forward. Blockchain will have enormous impacts in trade finance and financial markets, and we'll talk more about that this afternoon. So that's an overview of some of these key emerging digital technologies. Now, how are they being used within specific industries? So I want to briefly share a couple case studies from manufacturing and then life sciences, and then I'll conclude with some policy recommendations. Coco talked about how digital is driving the fourth industrial revolution. Obviously, we've moved from an age of mechanized and mass production to automation, the application of IT and electronics in the 1970s, to a world today of smart technologies, smart factories, marked by big data, network machines, and kind of intelligent devices and systems. But what we're really talking about is digitally enabled at each step of the modern manufacturing process, from how products are designed, to how they are fabricated and assembled, to how factories integrate and operate, to how supply chains integrate, and finally, to how products are used and consumed in the field. So first, with product design. There is a new generation of computer-aided design, or CAD software, that uses principles of generative design. Essentially, what this means is that the engineer or designer is able to go into software and specify the design features, elements, or constraints that they want a product to have. And then this software spits out or produces a version of a design product, often in ways that a designer can never before have imagined. So what you're looking at here is a picture of the new bulwark, the partition on the A320 aircraft that Airbus is making. So the engineer put in the requirements he wanted for that bulwark. It's got to be fire resistant. It has to support a certain amount of weight, have structural integrity. But the software spit out this design, which is actually 50% lighter and 40% stronger than any bulwark ever devised before. And as you can see, no designer would have ever said, that's the ideal way to do it. But design generative software, leveraging nature's evolutionary design patterns, comes up with this design. Airbus estimates that when that bulwark alone is deployed across a fleet of aircraft, it's going to be the equivalent of taking 465,000 metric tons of CO2, or essentially 100,000 cars off the road for a year. Now, these designs are going to be 3D printed. 3D printed refers to synthesizing successive layers of material into a three-dimensional solid object composed from a digital file. What you see here is the GE Advanced Turboprop engine. This is an actual turboprop engine. The new generation, the old generation had 855 discrete parts. That engine has just 12. And it's 40% lighter than the older version. 3D printing is going to be used in the future to manufacture everything from shoes to satellites to cars and even hotels. This is the Louis Yagich Hotel here in Manila. Will have a $600 billion global economic impact, and that 42% of industrial devices from medical systems to cars are actually going to be 3D printed in the future. So first, we're going to design and manufacture products more efficiently. And then we're going to have factories that operate better. This is a picture of Ford's River Rouge plant outside Detroit, Michigan. Ford has sensor and IoT enabled virtually every major piece of production equipment in this facility. They can detect when a product or an input or component comes down the factory assembly line if it deviates in even the slightest fraction of a dimension from expectations. So they're immediately able to detect any problems or abnormalities in the production line. Ford estimates that its implementation of an IoT and data analytics capability has saved it $2 billion over the past 5 years, generating a return of 450% on their $300 million investment. So we're going to have factories themselves that are smarter. We're also going to have supply chains that integrate better. I had the honor of being invited to Austria last summer for a Austria Industry 4.0 tour organized by their government. And we were in Linz, Austria, in northern Austria, at a company called Miebe AG that makes brake pads and transmission gears for the OEMs like BMW and Audi in Germany. And so we're walking down this production line in this factory in Linz, and this crusty old Austrian engineer stops at one point, and he slams his hand down on a piece of production equipment that is shooting out brake pads. And he says, "Now, Stephen, you have to understand, BMW demands to know the operational status of this piece of equipment in real time. They don't want to call from us saying, hey, our production machine is down, and you're not going to get your delivery of brake pads for the i8. No, they essentially at BMW have a combat information center in Munich, Germany, where they track in real time the operational status of the 6,000 key pieces of equipment for their i8 partners, because they recognize that in the future, competition will be about the capacity of OEMs to synchronize entire industrial supply chains so that they can get products to market timely, efficiently, and as cost effectively and innovatively as possible. So the capacity for supply chain management that Industry 4.0 affords is going to be incredible. And in the US, whether it's Boeing in aerospace or Procter & Gamble in consumer manufactured goods, this notion of synchronizing supply chains is kind of their future vision of competition. Finally, Industry 4.0 is going to change how products are sold and how they're used. So for many manufacturers, they no longer sell products. So if you talk to Rolls-Royce or GE aircraft engines, they go to airlines and they sell power by the hour or guaranteed thrust. Essentially, they sell products as services. They do this because the economics make sense. It's actually much more profitable. But the key thing to know here is a concept called digital twins. So whether it's a locomotive or a gas turbine or an aircraft engine, of course, there's the one original software design of it. But then these companies keep a digital twin copy of every copy and instance of that specific product being deployed out in the world. So for every single aircraft engine that it's sold, GE has a pro forma virtualized view of that engine, knowing if there is a specific crack in a minor crack in a fan blade. GE can even track for each engine in the world, every hour of flight, what the temperature and humidity level was that the engine went through during the flight. They even tell me they can track how many grains of sand have passed through an engine over its lifetime. And because they have this hyper intelligence about their products, then they can offer very profitable services contracts to companies. So when you add all this up and think about the impacts of digitalization, economists estimate that Industry 4.0 will generate $10 trillion of value for the global economy by 2025, boosting the productivity of the world's factories by as much as 25%, and possibly adding up to 1.15% to a nation's annual productivity growth every year. But it's not just in manufacturing that these technologies will have profound effects. The other, as Coco mentioned, is life sciences, where we have the convergence of ICT, biology, physics, and chemistry. Some of the applications are truly profound. And if you think about it, it's estimated that for babies born this morning in the United States, they will have an anticipated life expectancy of 129 years due to our ability to provide better healthcare. But let me just give you a brief few examples. What you see here is Project Dreamcatcher by the company Autodesk. And what that is a generatively software designed cancer trap. So cancer cells have a specific morphology to them, right? The pattern, their shape. So Autodesk is working with major biotech companies to develop literally a cancer trap that would be injected into your body. These like almost mouse traps will flow through your bloodstream. They will adhere themselves to cancers in your body and second them out of your system. CRISPR-Cas refers to gene editing. So this is the ability to actually go into your DNA and rewrite sequences of your DNA that are leading to mutations. So for instance, leukemia is a cancer that is essentially a miscoded pair of DNA. A company called Editas Bioscience out of Boston just received the first ever FDA approval for a gene editing therapy that is being shown to achieve 100% recovery of young children with leukemia by the ability to fix the broken DNA within your body. And finally, earlier detection of illnesses. I was at Rutgers University in New Jersey the other day, met with an entrepreneur. He has a technology that can give you 99.999% accurate detection of breast or lung cancer within 10 minutes from a cheek swab. So these technologies are going to have profound impacts. There are 7,000 new to the world drugs under development today, hopefully leading to better health outcomes. Just as we will have smart factories, so we will have smart network integrated farms. The application of digital in agriculture is expected to generate $6 trillion of economic value, and it'll be examples like the connected cow, drones that look out over fields and identify where to optimally grow plants, if there are pests, optimally irrigating crops, making sure they're hydrated. Digital will have profound impacts on farms across the world. And finally, as one example, is smart cities. We're going to make everything about a city smart, from the roads to the bridges to the sewers to the buildings to the electric grid. And this will enable better use of public resources and help us immediately identify and solve problems. Just briefly, this is called Street Bump. And Street Bump is a new application launched by the city of Boston. And it's just an application for your phone. And as you're driving around the city of Boston, it can detect if you hit a pothole, a speed bump, right? And so they're able, on a citywide basis, to instantly aggregate information about where all the potholes in the city are, and they estimate that they've gotten it down to solving all the city's pothole problems in just 3 days. I thought that was a really cool example. The smart grid in the US is going to have profound impacts. There are now 50 million smart meters deployed in the US, generating over $130 billion of value. And it's estimated that if we had a fully national smart grid in the US, we'd be able to cut the need for energy generation by up to 20% and cut carbon gas emissions by 18%. So finally, with those being some examples of case studies from various industries, what are my conclusions and recommendations for policymakers? The first is that it's critical that countries put in place national digitalization strategies, as Holland and the UK have done. In fact, we were asked by the European Commission to provide input to the development of the EC's next digital agenda, and we're working with the Finnish government in 2 weeks to deliver a platform and strategy for how the European Union can drive digitalization going forward. But it's important also to put in place strategies for the implementation of specific digital technologies. So India now has introduced a national AI strategy. The United States has a national IoT strategy. So because these specific technologies represent platforms for innovation across all sectors of the economy, policymakers should be thoughtful about how they can be specifically used. Over 30 countries around the world have now introduced manufacturing digitalization or Industry 4.0 strategies. And this goes for everybody from the United States and Germany to smaller countries like Bologna and Spain. What do these strategies do? 5 extremely important things. The first is that they create maturity indices and model use cases. So for instance, in the United States, our Digital Manufacturing Design and Innovation Institute has just introduced essentially a digital manufacturing audit that any US company can take to understand how mature it is in terms of, are we just at a stage of basic computerization and connectivity? Or are we starting to get a point from understanding not just what is happening, but why it is happening, to have visibility and transparency? Then to get to a stage of predictiveness. What happened, why it happened, what will happen, and then ultimately, can we get to entirely automated smart factories? A number of companies have integrated information from their sales teams directly onto the factory floor so that they're able to adjust their production volumes in real time to expected changes in market demand. That's kind of the autonomous smart vision of the future, where we have production systems that are making intelligent changes behind the scenes in response to their environments in real time. Country strategies are also doing other things, such as providing SMEs with tax credits to facilitate equipment upgrades. For instance, Italy now offers small businesses a flat 25% tax credit when they want to invest in new production equipment. Korea has done this cool thing where they now have a national cloud-based high-performance computing system where any SME can go online to access this advanced type of generative design software. Tool sets that used to only be available to larger companies, countries are now providing digital platforms that any firm can go online and have access to the same tool sets. And finally, as we'll hear later, upgrading countries' workforces with the digital skills required for the future is a key goal of these Industry 4.0 strategies. This is a challenge even in the United States, where it's estimated that fully 80% of US manufacturing workers lack essential digital skills required to take full advantage of the digital revolution. Finally, more broadly for countries, it's imperative that policymakers ensure their nations are leading in the deployment of digital platform technologies like mobile broadband and 5G, the next generation of wireless, because these will be the tools that allow innovation and the deployment of all these digital platforms. Making digital literacy a central objective of public education is critical. In the United Kingdom, they have just this year announced a national mandatory computer science curriculum that talks about the digital skills children will have to develop from K to 12 education. We'll hear later today about Singapore's Future Skills Initiative. One of the things it allows is the ability for any citizen to go online and take a digital skills assessment test to understand how ready they are to participate in the digital revolution. Finally, last 2 points. Because all these innovations and business models will depend upon the ability to move data across the world, it's imperative that countries not introduce barriers to cross-border data flows. And it's important that they always adopt the innovation principle, not the precautionary principle, which means that it should be the burden of government and of regulators to show that a new technology or a new business model will cause potential harm to society or to a consumer. The bias should always be toward the innovator to let him or her launch his new product, service, or business model to the world. Lastly, 2 final points. I think the Philippines right now has a really interesting opportunity in the global economy. Even as we speak, and we have supporters, I can tell you, like Apple and Cisco and Hewlett-Packard, they are in the process today of reevaluating the structure of their global supply chains. They are looking to move manufacturing activities out of countries like China that are not always playing by the rules of the global trade system, not protecting intellectual property, looking to put their foreign direct investment and production activities into countries in near Asia that play by the rules, that offer a strong digital environment, skills, good regulation laws and policies. There's a real opportunity now for the Philippines to insinuate itself as even a greater player in the production of global supply chains for advanced technology products. And finally, 92% of all scientists and engineers that have ever lived in the history of humankind are alive today. In fact, 80% of them actually live here in Asia. The point is to seize the opportunity. These technologies, these tool sets, they're available to you. Massively open online courses, digital platforms. Seize the opportunity, embrace technological change, and I wish you all the best with this conference and the future of Industry 4.0. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that fantastic landscape that you provided for us. Our next speaker will talk about how technology, more particularly about how technology affects jobs. And our speaker, let me call him, is Dr. Yasuyuki Sawada. Mr. Sawada is the chief economist at the ADB. He is a PhD. He has a PhD in economics and a master's in international development policy from Stanford. He taught at Stanford, the University of Tokyo, and Korea University. And he has worked for or done work for the University of Tokyo, the ADB Institute, JICA, and the World Bank. Mr. Yasuyuki Sawada.
Thank you very much, Coco, for a nice introduction. PIDS President Celia, Reyes, Socioeconomic Planning Secretary, and PIDS Board of Trustees Chairperson Pernia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and magandang umaga. phone. As I was introduced, I'm Sawada. I'm Chief Economist of Asian Development Bank. In order to motivate the first panel discussion after my presentation, I'd like to share with you the key messages. I'd like to share with you key messages of Asian Development Outlook 2018, in short, ADO. ADO is one of the flagship publications of Asian Development Bank, providing growth and inflation forecast, but each time we publish, we have a thematic chapter. And earlier this year, we picked this topic, what's the likely impact of innovation, industrial revolution, fourth version, how that affects Asian job. So I'd like to share with you in the next 20 minutes or so key insights and findings from this special report. And also having, listening to Stefan's wonderful presentation on overall picture of fourth industrial revolution and broader global technology and innovation landscape, I'd like to complement. I'd like to be complimentary to Stefan's presentation from the two aspects. Number one, I'd like to share with you closely looking at Asian observation or evidence. That's number one. And number two, I'd like to discuss what's the likely consequences or social impact of fourth industrial revolution in Asian context. And this time I'd like to talk about impact on jobs or employment. Okay. So, not to mention, if we look back last quarter century and so, foundation of Asian development or Asian growth, Asia has created a large number of workers successfully. So in manufacturing sector especially, on average, 30 million jobs annually created in Asia, and admittedly, or not to mention, this is the basis of Asian successful growth. But having this said, there is a growing concern. Many jobs are at risk of displacement due to a sophistication in robots and the arrival of artificial intelligence and other innovations. So this is the motivation behind our theme chapter. So this is a picture, repeatedly you can see. First, second, and third, and now we are facing an advent of fourth industrial revolution. And in the context of Philippines, for example, this fourth industrial revolution has been seen as a challenge to leading IT and BPO, business process and outsourcing industry. Although BPO sector has been a leading sector of Philippines' robust growth, and more than 60% of total employments are in call center in this sector. But many people has a concern these employment workers facing risk of automation. And actually, BPO industry estimate shows the share of low-skilled workers in BPO will decline from 47% a couple of years ago down to 27% in year 2022. However, across the history, automation has been repeated and resulted in workers' displacement. For example, arrival of ATM machine displaced the bank tellers. So that's a notable example. Another example we can see. And so here's a punchline out of our careful analysis of a wide variety of different data, macro, micro, or combined data. There are four main sort of messages arising from our reports. In one word, although there is a concern for technological unemployment or displacement of worker, but in Asian context, there are compelling reasons to remain optimistic about job prospects. So there are four ingredients, and I'm gonna explain with the data each aspects closely. Number one, new technology often automates only some type of job or some task of job, not all the job. So that's number one. Number two, also we see lots of innovations and sophisticated robot arriving around the globe, but technological feasibility does not necessarily guarantee economic feasibility. For example, sewing bots requires no labor to produce T-shirts. Technically, that's feasible, but sewing robot cannot compete with a very young and productive garment industry worker in Bangladesh. So that's number two. Number three, so arrival robot technology can improve overall income level of the economy or region and market expand. So these are consequences of innovation. And because of rising income and expanded markets, more demand. So finally, production is stimulated and more labors are absorbed. So this market expansion, external merging effect seems to be quite substantial in Asia. Number four, new occupation industry always emerge with new technologies. So we can be more optimistic if we look into the Asian data. So these are the four main findings arising from our careful analysis of data, Asian data. So one by one, I'd like to explain. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes in each. So number one, new technology often automate only some type of job, not whole job. In order to address this, we need to import some structure to the data. So we need to classify different type of tasks into four categories here. Vertical axis shows that task is a routine type of task, repeating the same thing, or down, non-routine. So that's one dimension. Another dimension is whether the task is manual, like you don't need to think, versus a cognitive. You need to think and you need to make decision. So this is another dimension. So by using this cognitive routine versus non-routine and manual versus cognitive, we can have four boxes. We can classify all the tasks into four boxes. So let's start from upright, which is number two, manual and routine. So typically, assembly plant workers repeating the same thing, soldering some parts on the circuit boards repeatedly. So this is the typical manual job and routine. Okay? You don't need to think, but you need to repeat the same thing. Okay? So this type of job is at the highest risk of displacement because robots can be very good at doing this manual and routine type of production and activity. So actually, according to U.S. data, almost 80% of workers in this box at the risk of displacement. Okay? Moving to left, up left, routine, repeating the same thing, but still you need to have some type of knowledge and cognitive inputs. For example, accountants and bank tellers. So these are the category number one. And again, because this is a routine type of job, because of routineness, this can be displaced by, potentially displaced by arrival of sophisticated robot. So more than 60% or 70% risk, according to the US data of displacement. So now let's move on to down left. This is cognitive, intensive, and also non-routine. So researcher like me, and also company manager, they are doing a lot of decisions, which is not simple, not repetitive, but you need to do really complicated decision making. So these people are least risk of facing a least risk of displacement, and according to US data, less than 20% or 10% of displacement. Because robot cannot really engage this type of task. And finally, box number 3, this is a manual type of job. So you don't need to think. Actually, you don't need to do a high level of cognitive decision analysis, but you do a repeat, same thing, and then, however, you don't do repetitive things. So hairdresser and chef, so they don't use mathematics or computer facility. So in that sense, it's a manual task. However, their task is not really repetitive. They have to do a really complicated decision making. So actually, because as you can imagine, 100% automated hairdressing machine is yet to arrive. So actually, this is really less exposed to the risk of displacement. Actually, according to US data, only 20 or so % of displacement risk. So these are the classification, and what we're gonna confine our attention is box number 2, basically, versus box number 4. So this is the first thing. Not all the job are displaced, but only some type of job, especially manual and routine type of job, at the high risk of displacement. So actually, as to the second point of technological feasibility does not necessarily mean economic feasibility, we can use the International Federation of Robotics data to look into different type of nexus between robot introduction and labor use. So this is based on 2015 data from 55 economies around the globe, and out of 55, 23 data coming from Asia. So this data basically, half of the observation basically reflects the Asian observation. As you can see, so blue bar chart shows the robot sales by different sector. And as you can see, robot sales are confined into capital-intensive industries such as electronic industry on left end, and automotive and metal. So these labor, robot introduction is really concentrated around the capital-intensive sector. However, and also naturally, they don't absorb a lot of employment. On the other hand, less labor-intensive sectors like textile, food, and beverage sectors, almost no robot adoption we observe from this data year 2015. But they take lots of employment. So this pattern reflects both technical and economic feasibility, but actually technical feasibility does not necessarily mean economic feasibility, especially in a labor-intensive sector. And then next, I'd like to show you our most important findings in Asia, specific to Asia, because of growing income and growing markets. We can be more optimistic about arrival of new technology or sophisticated robots. Actually, in order to address impact of a new technology on job market, we need to be a bit careful, because it's not simple one single industry adopt a labor-saving technology and then employment is displaced. So in order to illustrate, I'd like to give you some production process, flow of production process of T-shirts. So first, in order to produce T-shirts, what do you need? You need to produce cotton. So first stage is to grow cotton in farm field. And then out of cotton, you need to make a yarn. Okay? So this is a second stage, making a yarn, and then making a textile, or knitting and weaving and dyeing and making material. So that's the second stage. And then after making a textile, garment industry, so apparel. So sewing machine, with using a sewing machine, cutting and sewing, embroidering, dyeing, washing, etc., and also packing. This process is needed. And finally, T-shirts is shipped out to a retail store. Okay? So these are, largely speaking, 4 or so processes are needed. If one of these production process exposed to arrival of new technology, then of course that activity is directly affected in terms of employment. However, labor-saving technology high productivity machine introduced, then that sector can produce the same thing at the lower cost. So that's going to affect the downstream industry because of the price change. Okay? So we need to address both a direct impact and indirect impact, or input and output relationship. With that, we can talk about what's the likely overall impact of innovation and technology. It's more than 60% or even 80% increase in number of new occupations, like a web designer, etc., etc. But intriguingly, right box number 2, as I mentioned, this is the box highest exposure to technology displacement. But actually, according to Asian data, even this box, we see a lot of new occupation popping up. For example, laser sewing machine introduced, then laser sewing machine operator is needed, and other sophisticated robots introduced, then some manual and routine type of occupation newly created. You know, it's indispensable to create a newly, new type of occupation to operate these new robots. So actually, according to Asian data, even this box number 2, we see India almost 30% new occupation popping up in this box. Malaysia 7%, Philippines almost 40% new occupation popping up in manual and routine type of job. So these are very interesting, and having seen this, because the arrival of new technology can create new opportunities, maybe we can be more optimistic. Okay. So having said this, all the bright stories, impact of innovation, fourth industrial revolution seems to be overall positive in Asia, but there is one adverse impact in terms of social impact, which is widening inequality. Okay. So again, using Asian data in last 10, 15 years, depending on the country. So here, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, we classify wage change of box number 4. Box number 4 is type of a task or job which can be gained out of arrival of new technology. As a researcher, for example, I gain a lot from using new gadgets. So this box number 4, simply we can say winner of fourth industrial revolution. And then box number 2 and box number 3 in this time, because of data constraint, it's those people likely to be lagging behind. So we can compare wage change of people in box number 4 versus people in box number 2 and 3. Okay? So using Asian data, we have done this. So blue bar chart shows the last 10, 15 years wage increase of the people located in box number 4, a cognitive and non-routine type of job. So, and the red is a manual type of job, box number 2 or 3. So we can see clear big difference, especially in India and Thailand. We see wage rate increase is quite distinct. So again, this confirms with the careful Asian data. There are going to be people who can gain a lot versus those who are lagging behind. Okay? And this would create overall income inequality. And indeed, if we look into last quarter century change in inequality measures such as the Gini coefficient in Asia, most of countries encounter increasing inequality or increasing Gini coefficient. So let me wrap up summarizing implication of overall picture. So government should play a very important role because of overall positive impact. However, there are going to be widening inequality aspects. So government can play basically 3 roles. Number 1, shown in red, government should play a role to responding technology. And secondly, government itself should use technology to improve their productivity. And number 3, green, government should play a role to support technological change. So first part, red part, response to technology. Obviously, those who are lagging behind from arrival new innovation technology, government should provide training program, retraining program, and also some type of a labor protection policies and broader income redistribution policies. In order to do that, government also needs to expand, especially developing Asian countries, expand the fiscal space by engaging tax reforms. So these things are needed. And at the same time, for the company and private sector to adopt new ideas seamlessly, government can play a role to facilitate more flexible labor market. But this labor market policy should be combined with some type of labor protection policy and training policy. So that's the number one policy implication. In response to the technology, government can play a very important role. Number two, government can use technology. As a user of technology, its productivity can be substantially enhanced. Of course, job matching program, government can use new algorithm and web platform, etc. And also, as we have seen in India, bio, ID can make social policy really precise and really cost-effective. So government should play as a user of technology proactive role. And finally, not to mention, government can support this whole movement of fourth industrial revolution, so that overall economy can tap into the benefit of new innovation and new technology. As Stefan said, national digitization strategy, setting this kind of a big picture and big direction, that's really important. And also, facilitating adequate investment by, further investment in infrastructure, especially energy and ICT infrastructure. That's a really, has been and will be critical. And also, government can play a role to ensuring consumer protection, because big data now, needs for cybersecurity and consumer protection, and also antitrust competition policy is getting more important. As you can see, in the Philippines and other ASEAN countries now set up a competition agency, so that benefit of arrival of new technology can be more efficient and effective, covering a wide range of economy. And so this is a third role of government. Government can support and create an enabling environment for innovation and technology. So this is what I wanted to share today, and the main findings from Asian Development Outlook theme chapter, technology on impact of technology on job. So with that, I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much, and marami salamat po.
So allow me now to introduce the first of our two panelists, Mr. Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala, who is the chairman and CEO of Ayala Corporation. Mr. Zobel's Ayala Corporation is one of the country's biggest conglomerates, with its fingers and hands in many parts of our economy. He was among his international responsibilities, his membership in the J.P. Morgan International Council and Mitsubishi Corp's International Advisory Council. He was the Philippines representative to the APEC Business Advisory Council, ABAC, from 2010 to 2015, the year that we hosted APEC and ABAC. He was also last year named by the UNDP an SDG pioneer, one of just 10 named to that honor, and the first and only one from the Philippines. He has received obviously various awards. Most importantly to me, he is vice chairman of Makati Business Club, where I work, and therefore he is my boss. And I can tell you that in a room of very strong voices, he is one of the strongest voices in talking about not just SDGs, but our subject matter today, which is information technology, innovation, and the industrial revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to react. Let me just start off by saying to Mr. Ezell and Mr. Sawada, thank you very much for those very insightful comments. I've only been to PIDS conferences once before, but thank you kindly for this invitation. It's been fascinating, and I think you're very much on the mark. I also wanted to thank Secretary Pernia, who I know is not here anymore, but his pointers in the opening remarks about how these changes must be seen in the perspective of issues of inclusivity, while preserving economic growth and redefining the role of government are very much in keeping with the way we view the world. So I also thank Secretary Pernia for his views on the matter. Let me just start off by saying that what I am most appreciative about in both speakers is their sense of optimism. When you talk, when you hear speakers these days about digitalization, the tone is not always optimistic. Not optimistic because of the technology, but because of the effect it will have on anyone. And I congratulate both speakers for giving us a sense of the future, a sense of disruption, a sense of innovation, but a sense of hope as well in the opportunities that come with this. And that's very much in keeping with the way we view it within the Ayala Group and the business environment. I guess to paraphrase some of the statements made, it's clear the digital transformation, from what the two speakers have said, will be transformative in an increasingly interconnected world, and there's going to be more movement of people, more exchange of information, and more convening on all fronts. Consistently throughout the presentations as well is the disruptive nature, I guess, of that technology. But if properly harnessed, as I mentioned again, the optimism showed, it really has tremendous new opportunities for business, competitiveness, and the overall well-being of society. I think that's a key point. From our point of view in the private sector, we're having to create whole new ways of looking at things, addressing customers in new ways, providing services in new ways, and manufacturing and other services in new ways as a part and parcel of tackling, I guess, these opportunities. Anything that's new creates excitement. And I think as part of motivating organizations to shift and change in the way they do things is also creating excitement. I think there's nothing worse, as all of you in this room might know, about doing a job again and again and again in the same possible way. It creates dullness, it makes the minds poorer, and doesn't lead to the kind of changes that you would like to see in an organization. I think one major aspect of this digital transformation that's taking place, with all the changes affected, as the two speakers have mentioned, is a chance to revitalize organizations under a whole new framework of looking at things. And I think this is applicable to the academic sector as it is to the private sector. There will be profound effects, and from increasing productivity and the efficiency of tasks to our ability to analyze trends, as was mentioned, and design new products and services. And this creates, I think, whole new opportunities for all of us. More significantly, though, I think technology and innovation will have a deep impact on new skills. And I think if there's one major message that comes out of all of this, is the need to educate and train our workforce in a new way. I've always been interested in either the linkages or lack of linkages between education and employment. I think it's an issue that has to be faced squarely by both educators and the business sector alike. If ever there is a time for us to work hand in hand, it is now. And I think that disconnect, in all frankness, as a Filipino, is coming more and more apart. And I think there is a need for all of us to work together to harness that. I think there is a role for academia to set a new tone in what we learn and what our young people learn. And there is a role for industry and the private sector to find ways of giving feedback as well to academia of how this is changing. Economic growth, and I think Secretary Pernia mentioned it, has to come while also creating inclusivity for our people. If that disconnect between education and employment continues to widen, inclusivity will not go up. In fact, you will get a lack of inclusivity, I guess, in our economy. As was mentioned by the speakers, robotics, automation, cloud computing are all directly impact this sector, particularly in the lower skilled customer service jobs. I think it's no secret to this gathering here that the major driver, I guess, of our economy is the very exciting business processing out sector that has done so much for our economy. I believe that you can grow in that sector and add new products and services in more and more sophisticated ways as time goes on, but there will be elements of that sector, and it's already happening now, that will increasingly be automated. Nowadays, when I go to a customer service, whether it's a technology issue or just as a consumer, increasingly I'm being approached by texts from what are clearly robots and automated entities just interacting with me. What's astounding to me is how lifelike they are in the way they respond, in the way they act on issues that I bring up, even their manners, in the way they pause and thank and all that. And I know it's automated because we have been in the business ourselves, and I'm well aware of how these things are run. I think what's clear to me in that sector, and it is a sector that I've always believed should be fully supported, is it really a need to keep moving up the value chain. And I have seen it in the past. I think people from abroad have generally had a fairly rudimentary knowledge of how our business processing outsourcing industry has evolved. But I've seen firsthand in visiting these centers how people are doing equity analysis for investment banks abroad in some of these centers in the Philippines using graduates from our Philippine schools. I've seen them doing CAD/CAM designs for major engineering projects in the Middle East, again with companies that are in those sectors. And I think it's important for us as a country to attract companies that already have a market, companies that already have clients abroad in some of these sectors. And for that, we need to have, I guess, an atmosphere of encouragement to foreign investment and everything they might need. We remain low in ASEAN circles in terms of foreign direct investment and the value that they add, as opposed to local industries, which of course need to be developed, is that most of these, when they relocate to the Philippines and bring capital and know-how, already have a customer base. So you're actually adding an element and an entity that already has a customer base that then develops their business in the Philippines. If we can attract those kind of investments to our country, and rather than just rely on the consumer demand side in some of these new areas that our speakers talked about, then we can fundamentally change the nature, I guess, of the training and the expertise of our workers. Moving on to the manufacturing sector, which was brought up, I could not agree more. I also think that we have not moved up the value chain as much as we possibly could in that sector. It just so happens that we ourselves in our group, within the Ayala group, there is a company called Integrated Microelectronics and AC Industrial, two elements, and we're a global company. It's not just a Philippine company anymore. We have operations in China, we have operations in Singapore, we have of course two to three plants in the Philippines, but we also have them in Eastern Europe. We're in Bulgaria, we're in Czechoslovakia, we're recently in Serbia as well, and we have also in Mexico. And what's happened in this industry is that 50% of our business is now moving to the electrification of automobiles. So the electric component of automobiles, I think as our speakers began to mention, I think it was Mr. Ezell who said it, it used to be about 10% of the vehicle. It's now moved to 50%. And I think the point he made is a very valid one. The whole system of manufacturing is changing. And we've been fortunate as a group to be able to ride with that. And why do I say that? You take a country like Thailand as an example. They've had a very traditional automotive industry, and they have been in that industry for quite some time. But the opportunity for groups like us is to move into this new space as this industry transforms dramatically. The old system of manufacturing for automobiles as one proxy is completely changing. And when something is completely changing, it's a time where you can attract it. So in our group, we're basically buying small, medium-sized companies globally that can begin to tap this massive shift taking place in automobile design. So we bought new display companies, middle-sized companies in Germany. We bought a foundry in Germany that does the prototyping for vehicles for the future, and integrating it into some of our Philippine operations and our other global operations in electronics. We deal a lot with companies like Bosch that deal with all the electronics in Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, and the like. And it's amazing. I even had a glimpse of some of the designs, since we are in a company called MT Technologies in Germany and bought the company from a small family business. I had a chance to have a visual, and I won't mention the name of the company that was doing these designs, but it's a major car manufacturer. And the cars of the future, as you point out, the designs, and I saw them physically, what is being prepared for 3 to 4 years from now, are basically like living rooms. They no longer are a car the way we're used to it. And so even design is changing, and all of those changes. I guess the point I'm making is that this issue of shifts and changes should be looked at by all organizations, and there are tremendous new opportunities that come with it. But this involves linkages globally and cannot just be a Philippine linkage, and we have to find ways as a country to tapping ourselves, I guess, into these global networks that are moving in these new roles. And I just mentioned that. There are many, of course, other things, issues of data analytics, robotics, cloud computing. That's part of the infrastructure that needs to be built. The biggest issue I'd like to put on the table is the workforce of the future. They have to be cognizant, I guess, of all these issues, and they have to be adept and comfortable with this. And so we need, as institutions and as private sectors, to completely reskill our workforce in many areas. Now, we as private sectors are beginning to do it across industries. Our Globe Telecom has a Globe University. Our manufacturing IMI has an IMI University. Our real estate group has a university just to train people in the skills needed for the future. But this has to permeate our culture. And this concept of reskilling and retraining, budgets must be put into it, and there must be an awareness that this needs to happen. It goes back to the education employment issue that I mentioned. Just some final words. I only have a couple of minutes left. We, I think, have a responsibility as well, all of us, both private sector and government, to build the infrastructure necessary to allow these disruptive and innovative technologies to take place. Last couple of thoughts. These are just reactions from a private sector player. We need to find, I think, a balance between the issue of consumer protection that Mr. Sawada mentioned and the need to access data. Accessing data, using data productively, and finding new ways to use that to create algorithms and participate in these shifting changes on the consumer side is a vital new industry that will take place. I mean, all of us are beginning to look for data scientists. There are not that many. If we can create them in academia in bigger quantities, they will have great jobs and be well paid as we move on. Very, very hard to find. But the issue of consumer protection, which is very valid, also is a counterforce to that. I'm not saying that we should be completely protected or that, or that we should just have access to all data. There has to be a balance found, and I think that's an interesting field for us to address. Science and innovation, I was mentioning and having a dialogue with our friend from Arizona. We need to create a culture where science and innovation permeates our education, our private sector, and our dialogue. And it's an area that has to be overweighted, I guess, in the budgets that we all have, both private and academe. And finally, encourage industries in engineering, the life sciences, to set up shop here. Attracting individuals who already have markets, and I said this at the beginning, must be a priority. We are not very good at attracting foreign investment, particularly in these new areas. But I'll tell you, whoever comes here from abroad loves it here. And I think anyone who has come here and set up shop here likes it, but it's just so hard to get them to come across the oceans and set up shop. Finally, the issue of transformative and is going to affect all of us. We all have to be comfortable with transformation. We have to inculcate it in our organizations and really adjust to this new world that was mentioned. Finally, let me reiterate the point I made at the beginning. Optimism should be the name of the game, not pessimism. Our two speakers have done a great job in keeping that high on the agenda. Thank you for this opportunity.
Our second and final reactor is Elmer Jose Dadios. He is a full professor of manufacturing engineering and management development at the Gokongwei College of Engineering in De La Salle University. He has done research on AI, evolutionary systems, fuzzy logic, neural networks, robotics. He has consulted with the government, or for the government and private sector, on robotics and intellectual systems applications. He has a Master of Science in Computer Science from DLSU and a PhD from Loughborough University in the UK. Professor Dadios.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Following the discussions of our distinguished speakers, it is quite interesting to note that the evolution of the Industrial Revolution started in the 17th century. Back then, it was in 1760 up to 1840, where water and steam is used for mass production. This is the boom of the textile industry in the UK. At that time, literally, there was a revolution wherein a group of workers revolted and went to the manufacturing plants and destroyed the machines. And then the second industrial revolution happened in 1860s up to 1914. This is the discovery of electricity and the invention of the steel. So electricity at the time was used for the mass productions, and the invention of the steel for construction. And this is the birth of electric cars and ships and airplanes. So this is the glorious days of the industrial revolutions. And then the third industrial revolution happened in the 19th and 17th centuries, wherein it is the digital world. So the focus there is automation, wherein fusion of mechanical, electrical, and electronics and computing, synergy of those knowledge will take place for manufacturing. So until now, we have the fourth industrial revolution. So the fact is, industrial revolution from the first, second, and third, machines substitute manual labor. Yet, the quality of life of the people, the economic status improved because of the more value-added jobs were created. So this is the challenge now that we face today for the fourth industrial revolution. How prepared the Philippines to face this? And so I'm tasked to present also, as a reaction to the two presenters, the applications of what they had discussed. I'm going to show you the capability of Filipinos to do this research, and both intellectual and the manufacturing aspects. So, can I? Sorry, I'm used to going around. I'm sorry, I'm used on the classroom and walk around while giving lectures. So, one of the beauty of us at De La Salle University is we access grants. This is a technical glitch. Oh no. Can I? Okay. Okay. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge David here. We got this grant for automating the cocoa sugar. Hello. Now, this is just part of Industry 3.0, because I mentioned Industry 3.0 is about automation. This is not yet Industry 4.0. So I want to link Industry 3.0 to Industry 4.0. So the first project that we have is automation of cocoa sugar production. So the intention here is to increase production and quality control of the coconut sugar. As you know, our farmers, all over Philippines, coconut industry is #1. But the production of this cocoa sugar is a high value because it is rich in, it is good for diabetic and rich in glycemic index. So it opened business opportunity and livelihood to the coconut farmers. Now, the good thing here is that we have partners with the cooperatives in Ragay. So they are the one beneficiaries of this. So aside from that, we have partners with local governments and Philippine Coconut Authority. And I'm proud to say Jewel is here. We have partnered with Arizona University also with this. And other universities, Cebu, rather Bicol State University. So the idea here is to automate the production of cocoa sugar because manual labor is highly intensive. Farmers used to cook this one 4 to 5 hours to come up with the sugar, and then the quality of that sugar is, shall we say, not uniform. You can see on the right side for manual labor. So we opted a project funded by the USAID Stride to automate this one. So this is the picture of our machine that will automate that. We have a robot arm, and then we develop also a heater that will cook. So let me show you the, will you please play the video? Oh, okay. So this is the manual way of extracting coconut sugar. 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours, coconut farmer will do that. So I just fast forward this. It is with heat, and then can you please back a little, please. Back more. Anyway, so this is now the robot arm, okay, that will steer autonomously, okay? And then forward, please. Forward, more, okay. As time goes on, with the sufficient heat, that liquid becomes solid. Forward, please. Can you put the sound? I just want to emphasize the sound because this is how the farmers reacted on this.
Oh my God! Success! Problemaga pa kanina. Ano kaya mabubuo yung tobacco? Parang gusto ko umiyak.
This is very touching. The farmers in Bicol almost cried when this automated system was able to finish. You can see.
Ay, naku po, Diyos ko.
Thank you. So, we donate this machine to the community in Ragay. So they are earning more now, 10 times what they earned before. So this is the complete machine that we developed. That is as far as automation of producing coconut sugar. Now the next project that we have is about the cat's all. Yusik Gabe is here. So this is funded by the Department of Science and Technology. Now, definitely we have problems on traffic. So we know that the root cause of this is volume-based, and the other one is the behavior-based. So with that, we come up with a solution. We call it CATSOL. This is a vision-based system that incorporates artificial intelligence algorithm used for vehicle detection, tracking, and identification. So we have the whole architecture of the system. We have the vision, video analytics, and output system. This is what our distinguished speakers mentioned about. We have to develop an artificial intelligence algorithm such that our camera, our vision, we can understand the images and then know the plate numbers of the car and know what is the violations the driver violated. So this is our camera system. We have a computer and server. This is a sample of the images, videos that we have to analyze. And at the right side, this is the preview. If you're looking at this, we have a TV here that will display for the driver's notification right away. So we developed now a system. This is a startup funded by the DUST. So it is a product, a software as a service. We have a vehicle detection and counting system, vehicle classification system, license plate detection and optical character recognition system, number coding, and so on. And it is also a data as a service. So we can process the video and analyze that, and then we can have automated database encoding system, and then video evidence storage and retrieval. And of course, we can make reports out of that. This is where the idea of having a decision support system, wherein whatever violations the drivers can have, we can have this, and we can support that one by proof that he really violated that traffic. So a sample of this, this is the product that we have. So we can identify the plate number. Now the peculiar thing in the Philippines is that the plate numbers of the cars have different versions. We have plate number in 2014, we have plate numbers in 2015, and the old versions. And aside from that, there are other kinds of plate numbers, so that makes very challenging for the programmers. So in this case, we can have a system wherein automatically detect the plate numbers and record that. And of course, based from the MMDA's operation, there are operators that will verify the validity of this system. So the idea of creating, displeasing people to do jobs is what we don't want to make. So we need to use those people also to create the jobs, okay? So let me go to the, oops. This is a real time now. Please run the video, okay? You can see how the system able to capture, while the cars are running, our system can identify the plate. You can get that one, record that. So the mode of the cars in the Philippines is different. In fact, the self-driving car created by Google have difficulties to run in Manila. Why? Because there's a lot of pedestrians, and safety of that is difficult. That's why I was telling to David a while ago, they need to copy the expertise of Filipino drivers, put that intelligence to their machine in order for that car to run here in the Philippines. So we have display outside. You can look at our researchers here. The next project that we have is this aerial swarm robotics. A while ago, Ezell presented a farm manned by, observed by drones. So this is an application. We have drones developed, inspired by the swarm behavior of a swarm algorithm. So let me go to the video. Our drone can fly autonomously without remote. Okay, that's a single drone. Can move around, and then we can increase that one to 2 drones. They can fly together, interact with people. We can make it 3 drones. Okay. By the way, this is my lab at De La Salle. Peoples are moving around the lab. They can interact. Okay. You can walk around, but the drones avoids. Has the intelligence to avoid you. There's no remote control here. We have our own program, and then we made an application for this. Now robots now can carry materials or load from place to place. But we can use drone to do that. So in this video, we have a drone that will carry objects and please. So you can see this drone will take that object and bring it to a desired location. So you can use drones now for transportation. In manufacturing plants, carrying objects from one place to another, you can use drones. And these drones can cooperate. Because of the swarm behavior we develop, we can use 2 drones and even 3 drones. If we have heavier objects, they can cooperate to carry these objects. Now, machines can communicate with machines similar to humans. They have their own communication system. So in this algorithm, one drone lifts object and it is too heavy. He can ask help from the other drone so that they can do together to lift that heavy object. So again, this is autonomous. No remote control. These 2 drones carry that object and bring it to a desired location. You can specify the locations. And more heavy the objects are, more drone can help. Similar to the ants carrying heavy object, they can help together. So you can make 3 drones at a time. By the way, my students are outside. They're having exhibits on this. So if anybody of you are interested, you can talk to them also about the algorithm of this. So here, 2 robots try to lift, but they cannot lift it. So the 3rd robot come up, and then they are going to carry it together. Okay. So with that, drones have intelligence. Now, how we attract our students to study science and technology? So we made a game. This science for them is fun. So we made a robot, flying robots that play together. We call it robot drones. We know that a lot of students now don't want to study engineering. So we started this since in 2012, a robot game. In fact, I initiated the robot soccer game. And then this time now we have the drone game. So you can see here that students can use their hands to command the robot to fly. Okay. This is very interesting because the control of the robot is the hand of that person. We use a lip device and the marker for its robots. So the robot has sensors. They have infrared. They have the camera also to know the actual locations. At this time, we are not using GPS yet. So we're using camera to take the positions. So this is the left controller. You can see this automatically get the motions of the hands. And then whatever gesture, this is communicated to the motions of the flying robots to give its navigation. So going forward that way, going backward that way, and turn left, turn right. And then the robot will just fly, just like Harry Potter. You can command the robot to fly with your hand. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the challenge for us educators is how can we attract students to study science and technology, particularly engineering. So this is a come-on for our students. You can see here, that flying robot is controlled by the hand. Okay. So it moves up and down, and then it moves to the left, it moves to the right, okay. And then it goes up. So the quad goes forward and backward. Okay. And then they can have games out of that using two hands. One robot can fight against another robot. And then, so with this, there's a game now. We call it Game of Drones. Okay. So you can see two robots flying, and the two students can control this using their hands. This one, okay. So once the robot is in parallel, you can fire. So to fire it, you use this motion. So you can have scores, okay. So every time they are in parallel, the robot, whoever's opened the hands first got the score. So that's the idea. Now, another application for our flying robot is to the farms. Okay, so we have now a farmer in Batangas, Iba. He has a big farm, and he wants to look at the growth of his farm vegetables. This is high-value vegetables, and we can identify using our robot while flying there and get the images of those plants, and we can analyze the condition of the growth of the plants. At the same time, even the disease of the plants. So this is now ongoing with partners in the Iba, Batangas. So that's the thing that we Filipinos are now prepared to face with this fourth industrial revolution. So the thing that we want to emphasize is that all stakeholders should work together. The stakeholders from the government, from the industry, from the academy should work together. For example, I cite you our experience. In our catch-all system, we need to give notice to the owners of the car who violated it through, can be email or can be through post mail. However, the data of the owners of that car is not available to us. It is from the Land Transportation Office. So we need to, in our side, it is very difficult to convince them to share with us the database. So that's the big challenge. How government agencies cooperate each other so that we can develop a very sophisticated product for them. Thank you very much.
Professor Dadios, please have a seat here, and I'll call the other panelists back to the stage. Could I call on Stephen, Yasuyuki, and Mr. Zobel to join the professor?
I wanted to make one comment, if I could, about your catch-all system and how important it is for countries like the Philippines. There was a wonderful study done in the United States estimating that if we could achieve free-flowing traffic conditions in a dozen major cities like San Francisco, Denver, Dallas, they would increase their regional and local GDP by 9%. And for countries especially that employ like just-in-time delivery production systems like Japan, the ability to have free-flowing roadways that can get products and people to market where they need to be is absolutely vital to their economic competitiveness. So I think the types of things you're doing to help the Philippines deal with traffic is actually one of the most significant applications of Industry 4.0 technologies.
We're constantly reminded here of a JICA study, Stephen, that I believe says, depending on how you interpret it, that we lose $3 billion pesos per day because of traffic, I think particularly in Metro Manila. But I was also interested in what the professor said about the challenge of putting the intelligence of the Filipino driver into self-driving cars. I think that will prove a challenge to any technologies. Could I ask for the questions from the floor? I would ask you to, yes, the gentleman in that table, yes. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and to keep the question, sir, could you keep the question short because we have a limited amount of time?
Yes, very short.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Florian Alburo, University of the Philippines. There was a bullet in one of the slides of Mr. Ezell's presentation, which stated, adopt innovation principles, not precautionary principles. I am very disturbed by that because it should either be the other way around or give them the same billing. The point is that we need a good regulatory framework for technology and the products and services of technology. Because if we lose them through accidents, through injuries, then it will be very difficult for us to adopt those technologies. In particular, Uber doesn't say it is a transportation company. It's a technology company. Airbnb is it's not a hotel company, it's a technology company. And of course, Facebook says it is not a media company. It is a technology company. In fact, the technology has been much ahead of the regulatory framework that is needed for that. In fact, also in the wild, wild west, motoring, there were no traffic lights, no speed limits, no driver's license, no vehicle inspection. We need a regulatory framework because businessmen will be able to adapt those technologies anyway. Their profit motive is going to be important for them. But we need a regulatory framework.
Whom would you direct that question to, Dr. Alburo?
Mr. Ezell and of course Mr. Sawada. The reason is because if we have a regulatory framework, then we need a lot of people. When Tesla brings its autonomous vehicle to the Philippines, it will not be able to know what is a tricycle, what is a jaywalker, what is a pedestrian. It will need a lot of pictures of all of those which are fed into the AI of the vehicles. And that's good business, good employment for the Filipinos. Because millions and millions of tricycles, all different colors. You will have to identify them. Otherwise, it will be like the accident in Florida last year in which a semi-autonomous vehicle of Tesla had an accident because it could not distinguish a truck which was a color white.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alburo.
Thank you very much.
Stephen Yasuyuki, could you respond to that?
So the very first bank in the world to introduce an online banking offering was the Dutch bank ING. And when ING went to Dutch regulators to get approval for the online banking offering, they were told, no, you can't do it. And the reason given was because they would put tellers out of business. Similarly, in the United States, it used to take up to 3 years for our FDA, our Food and Drug Administration, to make a decision about approving a new drug, determining its safety and efficacy. Now we've gotten the approval time down to 8 to 10 months because regulators are empowered to have a conversation with innovators about what a drug needs to do to pass particular clinical trial stages. So I think our point of view is not that there should be no regulation at all, but that we should do a better job of experimenting with new regulatory approaches to support innovation-based industries. This is why we see 20 countries around the world with regulatory sandboxes for financial technologies, creating a safe space where they can test out new technologies and business models in an environment observed and controlled by regulators. So I don't necessarily see that it has to be either or. We can look for new systems that better regulate innovation-based industries.
Yasuyuki.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent point. First, I'd like to point out technology. There are technologies well established and involving almost no risk. For example, in order to drink water, we use the glasses. And using a glass in order to drink water, almost there is no risk. Of course, you can break it. So there are some non-zero risk associated, but it's a well-established risk. But other relatively newly developed technology always involves some type of risk and also unforeseen risks. One example is nuclear power plants. As you know, 2011 March, Japan encountered a tsunami and earthquake. And nuclear power plants in Fukushima that has been operated almost 5 decades, and Japanese economy gained a lot. So obviously there are huge amount of gain Japanese economy and country tap from this relatively new technology. But because of unforeseen contingency and some contingency beyond the predetermined scenario, nuclear power plants failed and caused a huge amount of cost, social cost. So I think in general we need to establish a regulatory framework in order to handle some expected risk. But I would say this is a continuous process. There are so many unforeseen events and contingency that affects the impact of technology. So I think, yes, we need to care about this, but it should be I think in real world, this should be a continuous process.
As Dr. Alburo mentioned, this is of particular interest to companies in the private sector. Could I ask Mr. Zobel to add to that?
I think the points made by the professor are fair, but I would still lean on the arguments being made by Mr. Ezell. Regulatory bodies, and I'm not saying regulation is bad, obviously you need regulation, but regulatory bodies tend to be structured around existing rules, existing technologies, and existing ways of doing things. It can be the very thing that can stop progress and innovation from happening. We've seen it already. If you read the press, you've got a company like Uber, just to use an example, or Grab. I think people have benefited from the use of these vehicles and the way they're used. Entrepreneurs have also found a new calling in being able to drive this. But regulation is around protecting, I guess, industry structures that are already in place. I'm not arguing that there should be no regulation. I would just argue that Mr. Ezell has a point. We should overweight innovation as opposed to precaution in order to allow a movement forward rather than stay where we are.
There's a question in this table. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, good morning. My name is Celia. I'm the director of the Philippine Textile Research Institute. It's an agency of the Department of Science and Technology. My question is going to be very simple. Dr. Ezell and Dr. Sawada, I imagine you're both doctors. There's a lot of, so I don't know if that's fake news. Nevertheless, my question is, thank you so much.
They are doctors.
They are doctors. Thank you so much. You made a lot of references to the textile industry. The textile industry has been the base for the industrialization coming out of England, and that has been the base for the Industrial Revolution. So coming into the conversation on this, a statement was made that robotization, for example, is not really having a lot of percentage utilization in Asia, but in the Western world, in America, for example. On the other hand, Dr. Sawada, you mentioned that you believe that it's not going to affect us in Asia, because you were using the utilization from 2005 to 2015. Nevertheless, I think the argument is that robots are not really going to be in Asia. They actually are going to go to the Western world, where in fact the cost of labor is higher. My point here is, in upskilling our people here, that will be a very important consideration, which means that we shouldn't be looking at robots replacing people here, but rather replacing jobs which can now be onshored rather than offshored. So I just wanted to have your input on this as we look at how we can upskill our own textile sector, which I believe is really something that can really be enabled at this point in time. Thank you.
So that's a very important question. And one concern is, as you mentioned, sewing robots maybe became scaling up and much cheaper to produce T-shirts. Currently, we have some numbers. Producing T-shirts in the US using sewing robots is way much more expensive than Bangladeshi garment workers producing T-shirts. So in terms of this simple cost comparison, we can be more optimistic. So, but this displacement may happen in next 10 years in the process of improved sewing robot. That's the number one. Number two, as I mentioned, actually in real setting in Asia, markets are really expanding a lot. So if you take some measure of middle income people around the globe, those who are having $10 per day up to $100 per day, if we take middle income definition in this way, now more than half of the global middle
income population are residing in Asia, and this number and proportion are even expanding. So actually, seeing this expansion of income and market in Asia, I think a risk of offshoring moving to onshoring, I think that's way smaller, much smaller. We also have some estimates based on Indian data as well. So from these two perspectives, I think we are on more optimistic side.
Would any of the, yes, Professor?
Talking about the jobs for robots, we can choose some difficulty job that human cannot detect. For example, our crisis now is the bokbok of the rice, the weevil. Now, our group was tasked by the Philippine PELMEC to create a system that can detect bokbok using audio. And this is difficult for a human to do, a person to do. So we can select, what particular problem we have to solve using robotics and automation.
Any other, are there any more questions from the audience? Could I, yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. Michael Fung from SkillsFuture Singapore. This question is directed towards Mr. Zobel, but maybe the rest of the panel can comment as well. So large corporations like Ayala Corporation clearly has the knowledge and ability to transform with the new technologies and what's coming and disrupting the industry. What can we do for smaller enterprises, small, medium enterprises, and what could companies, large companies like yourselves, do to help SMEs? Thank you.
I think if you analyze industry structure, you'll generally see that any large institution or large corporation has a satellite set of entities that revolve around it. Clusters tend to be very important in economic systems of one kind or another. I think the world has moved from full integration to subcontracting, to working with others, to allowing others to specialize while you work. We have increasingly flexible workforces. So we do have ecosystems around us. And I think it is in the interest of everyone to work with the ecosystems rather than the central institution itself. So on that front, I completely agree. And I think more should be done to encourage, number one, institutions that bring these ecosystems with them. And number three, that we support some of the smaller players that actually allow these ecosystems to drive. Let me congratulate you. We have not, I think we've just met briefly, but Singapore has an extraordinary set of policies and skills in reskilling. One point I wanted to make is that we're all sister nations in the Southeast Asian area. There's so much that we can learn from each other. Half my learning, if not more, comes from ideas that I pick up from others, from other individuals, institutions. I think any culture that we can promote here internally, where we continue to share information of how others are tackling these problems, I think would be useful to all of us.
Any more questions? Yes, the lady in this table.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth King from the Brookings Institution in Washington. Both Mr. Ayala as well as Professor Dadios mentioned very quickly the point about the students, education, the academic institution, and the relationship of that and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in particular, of harnessing that revolution. I would like to ask them to say a little bit more. What is it that, in fact, we are lacking in these aspects? Why are students not going into engineering, in particular the kind of engineering that you were talking about, Professor Dadios? And what can universities, what can the education system in the Philippines do to attract more students into engineering, mechanical engineering, and so forth? And I think Mr. Ayala has a lot of views as well about the education system in the Philippines, and it would be great to actually hear your views about this, because unless we do something about the education system, what does harnessing the Fourth Industrial Revolution really going to mean? Thank you.
Before I give that to Professor Dadios, I had a conversation last week with an undersecretary from DOST and also the CEO of your APEC schools. And they pointed out that one of the problems is that we're just scared to go into further studies that involve math and science. And I'm not sure how to address that. Professor.
Yeah, that's very interesting question. Actually, we in the academy really onto enticing students to do science and technology courses, particularly engineering. That's why we do competitions on the level of elementary, high school. The problem there is culture. It starts from parents. They want their children to become lawyers. It starts from the parent. So maybe education not only on the kids but also the parents. What is importance of engineering, sciences, and computing courses? So as far as we are concerned, for example, my professional organization, I'm one of the EXCOM of the Asia Pacific IEEE. IEEE stands for Institute of Electronics Engineering. We have these women in engineering. Because we lack women taking courses in engineering. So we have programs for the women in engineering just to attract and to give them professional values for this. So there's a lot of technique there's a lot of models we develop. And luckily we at LaSalle, we have so many women now in engineering.
Mr. Zobel.
Maybe to just follow through with the point of Elizabeth King on education. My ideas have changed fairly radically over the years, and I know we have a lot of academics in this room who know a lot far more than me. But maybe I'll just make a couple of points. There are many that can be made in the field of education. Number one, I think we have to be increasingly comfortable with taking people who finished high school and putting them in employment. It's the reality of our country. Very, very small percentage. If you look through, the primary school system to the secondary to college, very few make it to the college level. So the reality is that we have to create a system where people, number one, the corporations, we ourselves in Ayala for a long time only accepted college grads. We must be open to accepting high school grads who have technical certificates. And the same thing goes with the educational system. We have to get young people in certain areas and in certain fields ready to take on a job from high school, because that's the reality of our country. So the point I want to make is I think we should perhaps take a technical certificate that is adjusting to the new needs of society today and the new technologies as something viable and something students can aspire for and be comfortable with and not ashamed of. Generally, a technical degree versus a college degree in an individual, sometimes it's looked down upon. I think we should do the opposite. We should rebrand the Teslas of this world, maybe give them a new name, bring the skill sets up to the current needs of technology, and put it out there with respect. But I think the issue of properly certified technical schools is one area that I think we can improve on and give them a higher standing in our educational system. Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to add something to that? No? I thought you were... Any more questions? The gentleman over there.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Red Ramos. I work for a company called Allegro Microsystems. We're into semiconductor manufacturing in the Philippines. We also have a manufacturing facility in Thailand. And our business really is to provide sensors that usually go into vehicles, and it's intended to address the safety features of a vehicle. And the reason I say that is because our company is embarking on a smart manufacturing initiative, because we can't afford these parts to fail on the field, because we're talking about the safety of people when these parts fail. So we're putting a lot of automation in our factories. And I'm actually working with SAPI to try to push that within the semiconductor industry and hopefully grow beyond SAPI and just address it with the full Philippine landscape. And we're actually, along with my colleague Victor Gruet, I'm trying to use an existing model which is used by Singapore called the Singapore Smart Manufacturing. So it's an index that measures how mature you are to smart manufacturing. And I was concerned with Mr. Ezell's comment earlier when he said that the payback for industrial robots in the Philippines is 30 years. I'm just want a little bit of clarification as to what industry you're talking about specifically, because we as a company had looked into it. And the reason why I'm concerned is because if you say that across the board, everyone's going to stop. They're going to say, okay, we're not going to do robotics because it's going to take 30 years to pay back. We did some. Now, we're not necessarily looking at industrial robots. We're looking at collaborative robots, which are robots that can work hand in hand with a human. They do the things that humans normally can't do with a higher level of precision that humans usually don't. And they're much less, they cost much less than industrial robots. They're programmable. And I just want to say, I just want to understand what is the basis of the payback, because we can't just look at replacing people, but we're also looking at increasing the quality. Robots don't take breaks. These robots are programmable, so you can have it do multiple things at a time. So can you just provide some clarification, please?
It's 3 years, not 30, right? The payback? 30?
He said 30.
Oh my goodness, okay.
So, first to emphasize that we emphasize greater automation and the adoption of more efficient production processes because that is instrumental to moving enterprises up the value chain and permitting the workers in those organizations to contribute to higher value-added, higher wage economic activities. So that data was developed by my colleague, our president, Dr. Robert Atkinson. It looked at average wages in Southeast Asian countries and just was making the general observation that for most companies, they tend to think first about automating in higher wage environments, and if workers are paid less, because when they make investments, they're looking at the cost of capital, the return on capital, and it's easier to show that ROI when you're automating a higher wage job. Right. And that's why we're coming up with the data that in environments where there are, on average, relative to the global median lower wage jobs, that there may be less incentive of companies to automate despite the fact of its benefits. So my only point of making, even citing that statistic, was to say there's a compelling public policy reason for policymakers then to work with companies to show them and demonstrate the benefits of these advanced automation practices for their ability to innovate new products and services, operate more efficiently, integrate in global supply chains. So I was only pointing out as a problem that policymakers might have to face and address.
There's a lady in red over here and a lady in blue over there, but could I ask if that's you, but hold on. Are there questions from the back of the room? Back of the room? Okay, it's yours, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Angelique and I work for an international nonprofit organization. We are implementing a workforce development project for senior high school students, and the aim in 3 ASEAN countries, and the aim is to prepare the youth for the digital economy. So we have 3 interventions: soft skills training, everybody agrees our workforce needs that. We have a work immersion model, but the third component, the digital skills development, is our hiccup, because our 6 pilot schools, which are all public, are not even connected. So when we try to capacitate the students with digital skills, we are really at a roadblock because we can't even access Google Classroom. So these are free applications. And so that's our hiccup in the Philippines as compared to Thailand and Indonesia, where we're also implementing, and that's not our problem. So my question is, how do we prepare our workforce if we don't even have complete infrastructure for the digital?
Because we're time limited, could I ask you whom you're directing that question to?
Anybody? Maybe Mr. Ayala, Globe?
Mr. Zobel?
Digital infrastructure is vital. I think there probably, I can't speak for PLDT because I don't know all the numbers, but we're spending close to $1 billion a year in capital expenditure. I don't think there is any industry in the Philippines that spends that kind. Obviously, we've come a long way. The beginning, if you recall, for those of us who are a little bit older, we just started off with just basically getting a mobile signal. that has evolved, and now we're moving into the broadband era. I like to think that the Philippines certainly is nowhere near the top, but it's certainly nowhere near the bottom either. And there's a great effort being made to lay that infrastructure in place. I think the government themselves want to get into that, and eventually we're going to be testing out 5G technology in the first quarter of next year. That'll probably have at least some of the broadband speeds that could traditionally are being taken now by fiber optic cable. You're absolutely right. That infrastructure has to be laid out. A lot more needs to be done, and it's a matter of continuing to put capital expenditure out there. I like to think that some of the urban areas already have moved to a whole different level, but obviously in the rural areas there's a long way to go. But I think with time it'll all happen. It's just that change is happening so fast, and you're absolutely right. I think that needs to move at an even greater speed. And hopefully we can find ways to work with the government in achieving this. Thank you.
We have room for just one more question. I'll look at the back of the room again. Yes, there's a lady over there. Sorry. Yeah, we have one answer here, but the lady over there will get the last question. Go ahead.
So I'd like to follow up, importance of infrastructure investment. I have been working with a NGO helping relocated people from Payatas dam site. It's it's like a 2 hours drive from here, not far away, but a very low income community. And in order to building up junior elementary school and high school students' cognitive ability, numeracy, and basic English skill, we decided to introduce a tablet-based e-learning program. That's really carefully made and very user-friendly, and even teachers can use quite easily. But after all, we couldn't do that because of a lack of Wi-Fi access. So I think simple, basic infrastructure access, this is a binding constraint. And this is not confined to one particular example, not to Philippines, universal, everywhere in Asia. And actually, we did estimate how much we need to invest in infrastructure in order to continue poverty reduction trend of Asia. 1.7 trillion US dollars per year. That level of investment is needed. And of course, public funding, including a multilateral development bank, ADB, can be mobilized, but I think majority of this gap of investment should be coming from private sector. So I think there is a very much important room for public sector, private sector, and also building up basic capital market in Asia.
I've been shown that time is up, sign. So the lady in the back, could you keep your question very short? Thank you.
I just want to ask Mr. Sawada if you have any examples of governments of developing countries enabling that conversation that Mr. Zobel was talking about between the academe and industry. Because while Professor Dadios' example is work is a perfect example of the progress to be had with that collaboration. First of all, he is LaSalle, which is an elite school in the Philippines. And second, so far the collaborations I've seen in the world between, the successful ones between industry and the academe have been in more developed countries. So I wonder if you have any examples of how more developing countries have moved forward in that regard.
Mr. Sawada. Could you repeat the example you're asking?
Can you elaborate on the question?
If Mr. Sawada has any examples of how developing countries have moved towards more successful collaboration between the academe and industry?
Yeah, for example, AIT, based in Bangkok, is one notable example to building up academia and government, collaboration, and that has maybe more than 3 decades tradition. So we have a basic, Asian-wide network to building up this. So one way is to, facilitate this process utilizing a pre-existing platform.
First, I'd like to apologize to the lady over there who had her hand up earlier on, but I wasn't able to ask. I'm sorry you won't get your question today. I'd like to thank PIDS for asking me. This has been a great panel and a great audience as well. Please join me in thanking the excellent panel this morning.